My creepiest cases as a private investigator. The Williamson family. Written by thegeneralg. Thank you so much for agreeing to see me, Mr. Parker. My noon appointment began as she sat down in my office. It's no problem, Mrs. Williamson, I said. What brings you here? It's my son, Logan. I'm really worried about him, Mr. Parker. Okay, why is that? And please feel free to call me Will. Well, Will, he's been acting really strange lately. He used to be such a happy kid, but now he's all moody and sullen. How old is he, Mrs. Williamson? I asked her. Oh, he just turned 18 this last December. Well, ma'am, I'm not trying to trivialize your concerns at all, Mrs. Williamson, but having been a teenager myself once, that sounds like typical teenage angst. Oh, believe me, I thought that myself countless times. I can't tell you how much time I've spent on the internet trying to convince myself that it's nothing. My husband just brushes it off by saying it's a phase and all that. But in my heart, I just can't believe it. If everything was okay, he would never sneak out or act like he's hiding something from me, she said. Okay, you two used to be close then. Very, but that's not what makes me nervous. I get that as you get older, your relationship with your parents changes. I'm sure you've heard a million times that a mother just knows when something is wrong with her child. Well, that's the best way I can put it. I've already spoken to his teachers about it, and they've noticed it too. He's been behaving fine in school and all, but they've definitely noticed the same thing. You're a private investigator, so you know the feeling that things just aren't adding up and something is wrong, right? That I do, I said. Has he experienced any major life changes or traumatic events recently? No, at least not that I know of. But that's what bothers me so much. Logan used to tell me everything, and now it's like he's not even there. I understand your concern, Mrs. Williamson, and I will accept looking into the matter. Oh, thank you. And please, if I can call you Will, you can definitely call me Nora. That sounds great, Nora, but let me ask you this. Why did you come to me? Why not take him to a counselor or something like that? Oh, if I had a feeling that that was the issue and it would help the matter, I wouldn't hesitate for a minute. But he's not acting like he has depression or anxiety, although plenty of his peers do struggle with it. You got that right. It's awful. I'm so grateful that I don't have to be a kid in this day and age. It wasn't that long ago in terms of general years, but based on how education and culture in general has changed, well, it's practically a different era. I mean, I didn't even get my first cell phone until high school, and virtually all you could do on it was make a call. When was that? She asked with a faint hint of a smile. A little over 10 years ago, but it seems so much longer. I shudder to think what my generation would have done in school had you given us smartphones. I know what you mean. I grew up in the era of party lines. Wow, that's a throwback, I said with a chuckle. Tell me about it. But it's actually a big reason of why I came to you specifically, Will. You actually understand what a modern teenager goes through. I don't trust that some crusty old investigator truly understands what it's like being a young adult in this day and age. That's very perceptive of you, ma'am. Although, I don't know exactly why being a kid in school seems so different. Do you have any ideas? I've actually wondered about that for a long time too, ma'am. The best that I can come up with is that when we were younger, the world seemed like a totally different place. I remember back when you wanted to talk to your friend on the phone, you could actually call their house and ask to speak to them. That was barely over a decade ago, but if you tell that to kids now, they look at you like you're from another planet or something. Oh, I know that look, she said with a smile. I'm sure you do. To answer your question, being a kid just seems so much harder than it used to be. We've all seen the numbers about how kids have higher rates of anxiety and depression than they used to, of which social media may be a major contributor. While social media can certainly negatively impact anyone's self-image and cause issues, there's no doubt that kids are particularly sensitive to the negative effects of the stuff on the internet. And since a major symptom of the teenage years is feeling inferior and worrying about how you stack up to others, well, seeing people constantly showing off on the internet is the least helpful thing ever. That's a solid observation, she said. Thanks, but getting back to business, is there anything else troubling you about your son or that you've noticed that's a bit out of the ordinary? Well, let me see. Now that you mention it, did you see what happened to that poor girl, Maureen, over in the next county? I did. That was horrifying, I said. Now, Maureen was a grad student who had been brutally murdered when someone broke into her house one night about a month ago. Since someone had set the house on fire, police had initially thought that she died in the fire before the autopsy revealed that she had died from a gunshot. Despite it being all over the news, they haven't arrested anyone for it yet. Mrs. Williamson continued. Well, she used to babysit Logan when he was younger. And now that I think about it, Logan began to act differently, right about the same time that she died. I see, I said without saying anything else. Well, I told him that if he ever wanted to talk about it, that I was happy to listen, but he never said a word. Okay, thank you for telling me that, Nora. I'll do everything that I can to put your mind at ease. After that, we signed the usual papers and she gave me all the information that she could about her son, his schedule and his habits mostly. I wasn't much concerned with what he did during school, but the evenings were another matter. Odds were that if Logan was getting into something bad, it would be in his downtime. But while keeping an eye on him, I also had to make sure not to look conspicuous. Since teenagers and people close to that age are the worst offenders when it comes to looking up from their phones and paying attention to the world around us, well, there was little chance that Logan would be aware of my presence. A bigger concern of mine was that someone would notice me keeping an eye on him and get the wrong idea. But as long as I was my usual professional self, there shouldn't be any issues. Starting my new assignment didn't come with any surprises. Logan had no criminal record, and from what I could tell, he was a normal kid. Now I understood a bit better why Nora was so concerned. When someone perfectly normal suddenly starts to seem different, that makes people nervous. After carrying out my usual initial research, I spoke to Nora about keeping an eye on their house. She added that her husband traveled a lot on business and that it was usually just her and Logan home. The first few days of surveillance passed without much to report. But after about a week, I found something. It was a cooler night and a light fog was hovering in the air. I was sitting in front of the Williamsons' neat colonial house. I was in the middle of eating a sandwich when I saw Mr. Williamson quietly leave the house and go into the garage. Now, the garage was slightly detached from the house, and before he went in, he did the universal double take that just screams, "I hope no one sees this." It was weird. It was past midnight now, and the entire street was quiet. Putting down my club sandwich, I turned to focus on what he was doing. I also noticed that Mr. Williamson's car was not in the garage, but already parked in the driveway, which meant that he must have planned whatever he was doing in advance. Moments later, he emerged from the garage with what looked like a black suitcase or something. After putting it into the back seat of his black Cadillac, he got into the driver's seat and started the car. Looking up at the Williamson house for a moment, I noticed that despite the house being dark, the faint outline of a person was visible in Logan's window, which just so happened to be on the side of the house facing the garage. Now, things were starting to make sense. Since it was my job to look into whatever may be making Logan act out of character, I had no choice but to follow Mr. Williamson. Keeping a safe distance behind the Cadillac, I watched as he drove down the road and turned several times until he arrived at a storage facility. Taking care to stay incognito, I made sure to get several photos of him unlocking Unit 19 and going inside. The security lights cast a sickly orange glow over the area, which made his expressionless demeanor downright creepy looking. I couldn't see what he was doing inside, but He walked back a minute later without the suitcase. After relocking the unit carefully, Mr. Williamson drove back home without making another stop. Easing down the street with my lights off, I watched and took a few pictures as he parked the car in the driveway and quietly walked back inside the house. I didn't dare drive back down the street until he was safely back inside and all was still again. Sitting there with my hands tightly gripping the wheel, I decided to watch the house for the rest of the night and tell Nora what I had seen after her husband had gone to work in a few hours' time. Sitting there in the dark, I silently hoped that nothing else would happen before dawn. The rest of the night seemed like an eternity, and I was still wide awake by the time that the sky began to lighten. Right on schedule, Mr. Williamson left for work. Logan left for school, and Nora had the house to herself. After texting her in advance that I had some questions for her, I knocked on the front door. "Come in," she answered cheerfully. Walking in the house, it smelled so inviting. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and seared bacon lingered in the kitchen, making me realize how hungry I was. "What can I help you with, Will?" she began. "Oh, where are my manners? Can I offer you some coffee or something? You must be so hungry after your late night." "Coffee would be great, Nora, as would anything you have left over." "Of course. Chocolate chip pancakes?" "Oh, yeah, that sounds amazing," I said. After she quickly made some of the best pancakes that I've ever had, I got down to business. "Do you guys have a storage unit or something?" I cautiously began, although I was pretty sure what her answer would be. "No. Why?" She responded with a puzzled expression over the rim of her coffee mug. It was a bright pink mug that said, "This is my wine mug." "Because late last night I saw your husband leave the house and take some kind of bag to a storage unit," I explained while showing her the photos. She didn't say anything for a painfully long time before she quietly nodded in understanding. "The garage, you said?" she practically whispered. "Yes, ma'am." Without another word, she led the way to the garage, where we looked for the key. Nora immediately located it on his workbench and snatched it right up. "Let's go," was all she said before we were down the block and heading towards the storage facility. Ignoring my own feelings, I glanced over to check on her. Her face was completely emotionless. Hastily parking my car in front of the beat-up chainmail fence, I grabbed 2 pairs of rubber gloves from the back of my car and we walked straight up to Unit 19. "Are you sure that this is the one?" she asked. "Yes," I said while holding my phone. "Same number." She unlocked the unit without saying another word and we both lifted the metal door, which clanged noisily on the way up. "Here, put these on." I offered her 1 pair of rubber gloves before putting the other on. She didn't ask me why. The suitcase in question was right in the middle of the room, which didn't have much else in it. Despite this, being in the room gave me the creeps. It seemed so lifeless and cold. Taking care while unzipping the bag, I took a deep breath before lifting the top off. It was filled with large stacks of $100 bills. Hearing Nora take a deep breath next to me, I heard her mutter, "What the heck?" before I felt something heavy in one of the side pockets. Carefully opening that compartment, it turned out to be a gun, stained with what looked like dried blood. The cops arrived soon after I called them to the unit. After explaining what we had found, they went to pick up Mr. Williamson at work. When they returned with him, Nora stood there silently with her arms folded, while her husband stammered out nervously and denied everything. But, not surprisingly, the story eventually came out. Apparently, Mr. Williamson had been having an affair with Maureen, the college student, for some time. But all of that came to an end when she found out that he was mixed up in a shady business deal. Worried that she would tell someone, his solution was to kill her and make it look like someone had done it as part of a burglary, and then to set her house on fire. After Logan came home from school that day, Nora told him what had happened. After quietly listening to what she had to say, he took in a deep breath and actually looked relieved. Logan didn't know for certain what Mr. Williamson was up to, but he admitted that he had suspected something was up and that he was afraid for both him and his mom. He also explained that the reason that he had snuck out was to try and figure out what his dad was doing. The two of them tearfully embraced before Nora told me how grateful she was and that she didn't even want to think about what would have happened if she hadn't contacted me. To be honest, I don't want to think about that either.